Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the frigid shadow of the Arctic Circle, a place where the sun forgets to rise. For months, the air bites harder than a hungry wolf, and your most valuable possession might just be a pair of socks. Not just any socks, mind you. Imagine standing in a drafty supply hut in 1845, surrounded by wooden crates filled not with rifles or rum, but bundles of reindeer, hide itchy wool, and something called stocking liners. You've got 12 different kinds of socks laid out on a frost-bitten table, and you're expected to know when and how to wear each one. Welcome to Expedition Life. You probably wouldn't survive this, not without learning how to rotate your socks like they were parts of a combustion engine. In fact, the early Arctic explorers were so obsessed with footgear that they often packed more socks than spoons. Really? Because frostbite didn't just ruin your toes, it ruined morale. And when you're stuck in a canvas tent for 6 months of darkness, morale is everything. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'm always curious about where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand boots off on the splintery floor of an English naval outfitter's back room, the air smelling faintly of oiled leather and old fish glue. Around you, wool socks are being debated as if they were tools of diplomacy. Coarse merino for outerwear, one officer insists. Seal fur inner linings. Nothing else will do. Another barks, clutching a swatch, like it's sacred scripture. You crouch to examine a pair marked Labrador tested, stitched from what might be rabbit hair, and colonial optimism. Socks weren't just garments. They were gear. The earliest Arctic voyages in the 17th and 18th centuries relied on improvisation scarves as foot wraps or flannel stitched together by candlelight. But as exploration became obsession in the 19th century, sock science followed. Enterprising men like Sir John Barrow commissioned studies on foot insulation. You heard that right, studies. There were actual debates about whether 2 thin socks were warmer than 1 thick sock. Historians still argue whether Captain Perry's switch to camel hair liners was genius or just itchy madness. Now you slide your feet into a pair of double-stitched woolen socks, rough, scratchy, but oddly comforting. These were standard issue aboard British naval expeditions, known for being both warm and, unfortunately, sweat-trapping. The idea was to layer silk liners next to the skin, followed by fine wool, then coarser outer socks sometimes with a seal fur slipper over the top. It sounds excessive until you realize your boots will freeze solid every night and must be thawed with your body heat before sunrise. Still, you pause to consider the Inuit approach. No socks at all. Just expertly tanned sealskin boots, warm and waterproof. You'll come back to that wisdom later. For now, you're stuck in British boot logic. Each sock, you realize, has a purpose. Some are meant to wick moisture. Some are sacrificial layers, destined to be sweat-soaked, frozen, and discarded like used tissues. Others, like the famed Arctic issue long hose, are meant to be reworn after drying near your armpits for hours. You think I'm joking, but that was standard advice in multiple field manuals. Carry them in your coat till warm, one explorer noted. Then press against the belly until dry. Practical, if not particularly hygienic. Outside snow hits the tent in tiny flurries, each tap like a ticking clock. The mood on these expeditions wasn't always one of grand adventure. Often, it was boredom, discomfort, and foot care. You might spend half your waking hours just managing your extremities. And in the hierarchy of clothing, socks reigned supreme above gloves, even above hats. Tonight, as your eyes grow heavier, imagine yourself curling up in a wool-lined sleeping bag, your feet swaddled in 3 layers of knit protection. One explorer's journal described it as the sensation of toes being gently coddled by sheep's ghosts. Another simply called it the difference between waking up cheerful and waking up screaming. Even the naming conventions were poetic. Arctic hosiery. Standard number 3 sounds like a weapon, not a sock. Yet there it was, meticulously logged, counted, and rationed. Lose your socks, and you didn't just get cold. You lost the expedition's trust. Because a man who can't track his socks probably can't steer a sledge or navigate by the stars either. And so, on this freezing night in 1845, or perhaps just in your imagination, you watch as your companions sort and fold their sock bundles like monks handling relics. 12 types, each with a destiny, each with a tale. You wake up to the sound of the canvas tent walls fluttering like parchment in a storm. The Arctic wind hasn't eased, and your nose is the only part of your face exposed to it already numb. Beneath the thick sleeping furs, your feet are swaddled in what feels like a woolen sarcophagus. You move your toes cautiously, peeling apart the sock layers. Inner liner, damp. Mid-layer, stiff. Outer sock frozen into the rough shape of your heel. This, you think, is what passes for comfort out here. Layering was everything. Early Arctic explorers didn't just wear socks. They engineered their own miniature ecosystems with them. You might start with a fine silk liner to keep moisture off the skin. Over that, a mid-weight wool sock, maybe something lovingly darned, at a naval depot in Portsmouth. Next came the heavy hitters, thick worsted wool, sometimes layered twice, finished off with fur slippers or oversocks made of caribou hide. It was like dressing your foot in an onion costume if onions were flammable and chafed like a bad breakup. And yet they still got frostbite. Historians still argue whether the layering system actually helped or just created the illusion of protection. One school of thought holds that the overuse of layers, especially without proper ventilation, trapped sweat, which then froze, leading to damp insulation and ultimately tissue death. You wince just thinking about it. It turns out too warm was a real threat when the cold was this brutal. You begin the day by crawling out of your sleeping roll, pulling on boots that are still lined with yesterday's socks. You'd rotated them. Of course, dry pair for sleeping, semi-damp for walking, and the emergency dry pair kept pressed to your chest overnight, like a treasured secret. On a ship, socks were rationed and cataloged like gunpowder. Men were issued 2 or 3 pairs a week, expected to hand wash them in seawater, then beat them dry against the hull if the weather allowed. In the Arctic, you're lucky to get the sweat out before the socks freeze into crunchy foot sculptures. They'd hang lines inside the tents for drying, but dry was a generous term. With temperatures well below freezing, even inside, you'd wake up to your footgear dangling like woolen popsicles, often stiffer than rawhide and twice as uncomfortable. One explorer likened putting them back on to inserting one's foot into a mouthful of icicles and regret. Another wrote that the socks crackled as if possessed by the cold spirits of the north. And yet, you kept layering, because nothing quite compared to that fleeting moment when the socks were warm. That 10-minute window just after you'd stuffed your boots with body-warmed socks, right before they absorbed all the sweat and despair of the journey ahead. You'd feel almost smug, even cheerful, for those first 100 paces. Until, of course, the itching began. Yes, itching. Coarse wool was the default material for British expeditions, easy to source, relatively insulating, and perfect for ruining your skin, one irritated nerve at a time. Many a diary mentions the red ankles, a condition caused by long days of sock friction, paired with snow-damp cuffs. Several explorers used strips of soft linen, or even rabbit fur, as makeshift buffers. Some went so far as to rub mutton fat on their ankles before dressing, believing it created a seal. You're not quite sure whether to laugh or gag. But innovation was part of survival. Take, for example, the Norwegians. You'd watch them with a mix of envy and stubborn pride as they calmly slid their feet into thick, felted wool socks, then wrapped them in reindeer hide boots so light they looked like slippers. No itching, no chafing, no fuss. They moved faster, talked less, and didn't smell quite so much, like damp sheep. You, meanwhile, have developed a new technique, rolling your sock layers in a tube, slipping them over your foot like an Arctic eclair, then adding a final wool wrap held with twine. You're pretty proud of this, until your toe goes numb around hour 3, and you have to spend 10 minutes massaging life back into it under a tarp while pretending everything's fine. You're learning. Tonight, as your body sinks back into its makeshift bedroll, you rearrange your socks with the solemnity of a ritual. Damp ones go inside the coat. Semi-dry ones get fanned near the candle. The best pair, your lucky socks stitched with a red thread by your sister back home, get pressed to your chest, close to your heart, and closer still to survival. You drift off, wondering how many other men are out here doing the same. It's day 17, and someone has lost the sock crate. Not a mitten, not a shovel. An entire wooden crate labeled Woolen Hose Grade B has vanished somewhere between the ship's hold and the offloaded supply sledge. The panic in the camp is immediate and completely disproportionate unless you've ever faced a month of frozen marches with only 2 semi-functional socks and a pair of boiled boot liners. You blink against the bright white of the snowfield, trying to recall where you last saw the crate. There's talk of it sliding off the sledge during last night's blizzard. Or maybe it was never loaded in the first place. Some mutter that Private Lasky was seen with suspiciously full pack straps this morning. Lasky insists those were medicinal foot rags, which somehow makes it worse. The thing about early Arctic expeditions, Franklin's in particular, is that logistical failure didn't just cost you time. It cost you toes, the Great Sock. Shortage of 1819. As it was sarcastically dubbed in one crew's diary, led to 15 cases of frostbite and one attempted trade for a single dry sock. The exchange rate. Half a bottle of rum and an extra hour off sled rotation. Historians still argue whether the crate was ever real. Some say it was simply miscounted. Others suggest it may have been borrowed by an enterprising junior officer trying to curry favor with the sled dogs by using wool scraps for bedding. Whatever the truth, one thing becomes clear. Socks are currency now. You join the hunt. The camp spreads out like a search party after a royal jewel. Men dig in snowdrifts, peek inside every crate. even shake down fellow crewmen with the suspicion of half-starved raccoons. Someone finds a single sock, black, long stiff with frost, but no crate. It's a start. You carefully fold it and place it under your arm. Even one sock has value now. As the day drags on, a barter economy emerges. Lieutenant Shaw offers to lend out his dry inner pair in exchange for someone doing his watch shift. Corporal Fisk swaps a left-footed camel hair sock for a handful of raisins. The ship's carpenter, known only as Bent, is found quietly wearing 3 different socks, none of which match the standard issue. A quiet tribunal is formed. Bent is acquitted with a warning, and one sock is repossessed for the good of the group. You begin to keep a mental inventory. Sock pair 1, blue wool right, foot stretched. Sock pair 2, tan cotton, thin at the heel. Emergency sock, single striped, possibly French. You tuck that one deep into your chest pocket, like a medal. The officers, meanwhile, hold a meeting. Their solution: ration the remaining socks and appoint a sock marshal. The job is as miserable as it sounds. You watch Lieutenant Holloway, the unfortunate appointee, spend the afternoon inspecting foot wrappings like a particularly judgmental nurse. "This sock," he says, holding one up by its threadbare cuff, "is an embarrassment to the Empire." You nod solemnly. "It's your sock." You say nothing. The absurdity is only matched by the seriousness of it all. Because when night falls and the temperature plunges, the man with the driest socks will sleep the warmest. And tonight, you draw the short straw. Your rotation includes an hour of perimeter watch followed by snow shoveling duty. By the time you're back in the tent, your only wearable pair is icy and smells faintly of mustard. Don't ask. You make a decision. You go sockless. It is a terrible idea. Within 15 minutes, your toes are screaming. Within 30, they're numb. You wrap your feet in your scarf, then your hat, then your undertunic. Desperation smells like boiled wool and regret. You fall asleep, curled into a ball, dreaming of entire sock aisles in department stores, lit with golden halos, like cathedrals of comfort. In the morning, the crate is found buried under a tarp near the firewood. No one knows who moved it. No one asks. But for a brief, glorious half-hour, men embrace like reunited siblings over bundles of mismatched hose. You claim 2 new pairs, well new-ish. One has a suspicious burn mark. The other smells strongly of whale oil. You don't care. You layer them on carefully, lovingly, like sealing letters to your future self. Don't give up. you still have socks. You've never truly understood the phrase bone-chilling until you try drying socks at -40. Not -4, not even -14, -40. Celsius and Fahrenheit meet here in miserable harmony, agreeing for once that this is the temperature at which all hope begins to freeze. You're sitting cross-legged in the cramped canvas shelter, clutching a pair of damp wool socks, like they're rare birds you hope might spring back to life. You've wrung them out by hand. You've waved them near the sputtering blubber lamp. Now they lie across your knees, slowly hardening like forgotten pastries. You sigh. It turns out drying anything in the Arctic is an exercise in futility and stubbornness. The air's too cold to pull out moisture. Instead, it traps it inside the fibers, where it turns to ice. Socks become stiff as bark. You bend one gently. It snaps like a cracker. Back in London, someone once told you that the heat of the body will do the rest. That person had clearly never been to Baffin Bay. Your body is too busy keeping your heart going to spare any heat for a half-damp ankle wrap. And yet, you persist tucking the socks under your armpits, inside your shirt, over your thighs. You rotate them every 20 minutes, like a rotisserie chef gone mad. Historians still argue whether these half-drying rituals helped or hurt. Some believe they merely created a warm, damp incubator, perfect for trench foot. Others insist that even partial drying reduced stiffness, making the socks less likely to shred toes. Either way, there's little dignity left in the process. You're in a tent with 7 men each, with socks tucked into increasingly awkward parts of their clothing. One fellow has his tied around his neck like a scarf. Another's stuffed his into his mittens. You try not to look anyone in the eye. Later, during a lull in the wind, someone suggests hanging a drying line outside. There's a long pause. You all look at one another, then burst into laughter. It's the closest thing to joy you've felt in days. A drying line. Outside, in this, the socks would freeze faster than a sneeze in January. Still, someone tries it just to prove a point. Within 5 minutes, the socks are crunchy enough to be used as camp tools. You can practically saw wood with one. You go back to your own method, the oven. 2 hot stones, wrapped in cloth, placed inside your boots, with socks draped gently over the top. It works, sort of. The socks end up warm and slightly damp, better than frozen, worse than dry. You slide your feet in, and for a brief moment, it feels like a spa treatment designed by someone who's never had a happy thought. And yet, there's an odd rhythm to it now. You dry, you rotate, you endure. Over time, the socks develop personalities. The pair with the uneven stitching always slips to the left. The ones with the hole under the ball of the foot squeak when you walk too fast. You start naming them: Old Scratchy and the Quitter, Patchface, Lefty the Brave. It's both ridiculous and necessary. Out here in the yawning silence of endless snow, socks become your sanity anchors. Of course, the officers maintain a different approach. You notice Lieutenant Morley heating his socks over a pot of boiling tea water. It's clever, but the socks take on a permanent aroma of bergamot and desperation. He pretends it's dignified, smells of civilization. He mutters, inhaling one like a bouquet. You nod and pretend not to see the steam fogging his monocle. At night, you line up your socks like tiny soldiers, drying in formation. They stand at attention, rigid and cold. You whisper a small promise to them that you'll keep them dry tomorrow. You lie. You always lie. But they forgive you. They always do. And in your dreams, you're back home, barefoot, on warm floorboards, a fireplace crackling in the corner. Your mother knits by the window. She's holding a pair of socks the color of sunshine and moss, and you don't even mind the scratch. Then you wake. It's 3 a.m. A blizzard screams outside. Your socks have frozen again. Time to start over. You're on your 3rd hour of sled duty, trudging across an unyielding field of wind-blasted ice, and it's time for a sock check. You stop lean against the sledge and begin the laborious task of unlacing your boots without losing your fingers to the wind. Your toes feel like they belong to someone else, someone with a worse attitude. You peel back the leather layers, and there they are, your socks. Damp, stiff, and slightly steaming in the cold air, like miniature volcanoes of suffering. This is the rhythm of life out here. Every few hours, stop. Check the socks. Rewrap. Layer again. You're not the only one. All around you, men pull off boots and examine toes with the reverence of monks counting relics. A blackened spot means a lost toe. A blister might mean infection. A damp heel could spell days of agony. It's not vanity, it's survival. And it turns out, sock privileges follow the chain of command. You, a low-ranking field assistant, get whatever's left in the crate after the officers take their pick. That means socks with more darn than wool, or pairs that don't match in thickness or temperament. The officers, oh, they get the Angora blends, the brushed camel hair, the luxurious alpaca wool hand-stitched by the Royal Navy's quartermasters, designed for delicate toes and dry cabins. You once glimpsed Commander Whitby removing his socks, pale gray, no pilling stitched, with a little red. Custom, no doubt. He looked almost smug as he laid them on his coat to dry. You, on the other hand, are wearing something that smells like a sheep fought a fish and lost. Historians still argue whether such rank-based sock allocations affected morale. Some argue it built discipline, while others suggest it bred quiet resentment. After all, when you're all freezing to death, equality starts to look pretty appealing. There are even rumors that some lower officers would deliberately wear ragged socks in solidarity with their men. Admirable, foolish, possibly apocryphal. Meanwhile, you've developed a sock strategy. Rotate based on duty. Marching socks for sled days. Sleeping socks never to be walked in only for the tent. Diplomatic socks for bartering or impressing the quartermaster. And of course, your surprise socks hidden in the lining of your coat reserved for the day. Everything goes horribly wrong, which is statistically about 3 days from now. At tonight's inspection, the sock marshal, yes, that's still a thing, walks through the tent with his lantern casting everyone's footgear in ghostly gold. He pauses at your pile, lifts a sock with 2 fingers. Still wearing these, are you? You nod, too tired to explain that yes, you have exactly 4.5 pairs, and one is currently being used to plug a leak in your canteen. He snorts and moves on, leaving behind the faint judgment that only comes from someone whose own socks never leave his shirt collar. You lie back, exhausted. You tug on your night pair, thin, mended, but dry, and feel a rare moment of comfort. You remember your first day on the ship, laughing with the others at the absurd list of issued items. Socks, 12 types, must be labeled and rotated. Now it makes perfect sense. Socks weren't just part of the uniform. They were the uniform. They were shelter, morale, and warmth wrapped in scratchy loops of wool and hope. One night, weeks later, you overhear a story by the fire. Apparently, on an earlier voyage, a man was caught hoarding socks, not just his others. He'd constructed a secret compartment in the supply sledge and lined it with socks stitched together into a bizarre tapestry of betrayal. When discovered, the men were so furious, they forced him to wear only the crustiest half-frozen pairs for a week. They called it the Great Foot Justice. You laugh into your collar. At least some crimes get due punishment. You drift off thinking not of glory, nor of gold, nor even of survival. You think of socks. By now, you've developed the deeply unfortunate skill of identifying sock fibers by smell alone. This wasn't part of the training, of course. No one at the Admiralty briefed you on the olfactory spectrum of wet wool versus seal hide liners, left too long under someone's bunk. But here you are, huddled under a canvas flap at dusk. Nose, wrinkling eyes, squinting into the gloom, trying to determine whether the socks balled up at your feet are safe to re-wear, or should be offered to the Arctic gods as a sacrifice. Then comes the suggestion, half joking, half desperate. Can you eat socks? It's not entirely absurd. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you recall a journal from a prior expedition. In it, the author describes boiling leather belts for soup, softening, boot soles in broth, and yet stewing wool, foot wraps in water to extract what little nourishment remained. Historians still argue whether anyone actually consumed socks. Most scholars suspect the accounts were exaggerations or metaphors for desperation, but others point to a handful of suspiciously vague survival logs and missing inventory tallies. Either way, you can't help but eye your own pair with morbid curiosity. They do look a bit like overcooked noodles. Woolly, salty, possibly chewy. Your stomach growls. Thankfully, tonight's dinner is something loosely resembling stew, a slurry of rehydrated peas, whale fat, and whatever's left of the salt pork. You dunk your spoon in your feet, still cold, even after an hour beside the fire, and try not to think about the fact that you're basically marinating your socks inside your boots all day long. They're little crock pots of suffering. You look over at Private Merton, who's toasting his socks over a low flame using 2 skewers, and the kind of grim determination typically reserved for grilled fish. "Gotta get 'em crispy," he mutters. You're unsure whether he means dry or edible. You decide not to ask. And yet, the idea of sock as sustenance stays with you. The outer layer, rough and fibrous, might function like poorly made bread. The inner layer, especially the thinner cotton blend types, could be chewed in a pinch, if only to stave off madness. You once read that cellulose found in cotton is technically digestible in minuscule amounts. You figure a man could survive on sock soup for half a day, perhaps less depending on how much lint he can stomach. You start joking about recipes with the other men. Sock à l'orange. Filet de toe wool. Someone offers sock and beans, which earns him a round of tired applause. You all laugh, weak, wind-burnt, brittle laughter. But it's still laughter. It keeps you human. There's a quiet tragedy in that after weeks in the white abyss, your mind starts to wrap itself around absurdities just to stay functional. A dry sock becomes a prize. A damp one becomes a curse. An edible one Now that's just innovation. You remember a passage from a mid-century Norwegian manual that advised drying socks with friction alone, rubbing them between the palms for 15 minutes straight. You try it. Your arms tire by minute 6. The socks remain stubbornly damp. You swear they're mocking you. Still, you persist. You wrap one pair around your hands like mittens, another around your neck like a scarf. You shove the rest under your blanket and pray they don't freeze into a single stiff braid by morning. You've taken to writing poems in your journal about socks. Haikus mostly. You'd be embarrassed, but there's no one here to judge. Frostbite is always waiting in the wings. One exposed toe. One careless night of sleep. The men whisper about it in hushed tones, like speaking the word aloud might summon it. You've seen early signs, bluish tips, waxy heels. The remedy is simple and painful. Remove the sock, warm the foot against someone else's skin, and pray it tingles again. You've offered your own chest more than once. There's something humbling about being a human furnace. You hold a teammate's feet under your arms and breathe slow, steady warmth into them. He doesn't speak. Neither do you. But when the warmth returns, there's a silent bond forged stronger than any metal. And in that moment, you know these socks aren't just fabric. They are insulation against the elements, yes, but also against despair. It begins with a faint whiff of lamp oil and loneliness, and ends with you wearing 2 completely different socks and not caring one bit. That's the arc of your day. You're seated on the edge of a snow-covered crate, attempting to patch a hole the size of a coin in the heel of your last semi-intact sock. The yarn is fraying, your needle is bent, and your hands are too cold to be useful. After 20 minutes of fumbling, you give up and reach into your miscellaneous pile. It's a sock graveyard, odd lengths stretched, cuffs, a couple that may have been mittens in a past life. You select 2. They don't match. One is marled gray and heavy. The other is thinner, probably cotton, probably French. You don't care. You put them on and give your feet a little wiggle. There's a surprising comfort in surrendering to asymmetry. The left foot is snug and warm. The right foot feels like it's wearing a limp biscuit. But at least it's your biscuit. Mismatched socks become a fashion statement, by which I mean no one comments because they're doing the same. You spot Lieutenant Braithwaite in socks that look like they were knitted from red string and rage. Corporal Fisk has one boot stuffed with newspaper, and the other with a rolled-up pair tied in place with twine. There is quite literally no standard anymore. Historians still argue whether the sock chaos was tolerated or tacitly approved. Uniform codes were strict on paper, but out here, in the frost-bitten reality of Arctic life, functionality reigned. If your socks stayed dry and your toes stayed pink, no one cared if they matched your trousers. Some diaries even suggest that eccentric sock choices became a badge of pride. So you lean in. You begin adding little flourishes to your pairings. A splash of colored thread, a tiny stitched X on the cuff. One night, you tie a knot at the top of your left sock and pretend it's for ventilation purposes. Someone laughs. You feel like a magician pulling joy out of wool. The camp begins to notice. Private Merton starts braiding his socks before wearing them, claims the texture stimulates circulation. Sergeant Leary wears his inside out for better wickability, which isn't a real word, but no one stops him. You even see the sock marshal, once a stickler for protocol, sporting what appears to be a children's stocking repurposed with twine and whale sinew. You nod at him. He nods back. A quiet understanding passes between you. But mismatching isn't just fashion, it's function. When supplies dwindle, you work with what you have. A thicker sock on your dominant foot to absorb the pounding of marches. A thinner one on the other to avoid blisters. You begin tailoring your pairings to the day's terrain. Ice, heavy double wool. Slush and slippery fur on the inside, cotton over top to reduce slide. It becomes an art. You're no longer just surviving. You're adapting. And then, of course, come the naming ceremonies. It starts as a joke. This here is Sir Itch-a-Lot, you say, holding up a particularly scratchy wool sock. He's got opinions, but it spreads. The men start naming their favorites, like pets or companions. Lefty Socktopus, the Duke of Toe Warm. You hear one man softly humming a lullaby to a freshly dried pair as he folds them with care. It's strange, but oddly soothing, because in a place that strips away every luxury and comfort identity becomes portable. You don't have a fireplace or a feather bed, but you have these. Your mismatched, mended, mourned, and marveled over socks. You made them yours. At night, under the tent's canvas, you run your hands over each one before rolling it. The texture, the weight, the tiny prick where you fixed a tear. Each sock is a diary entry, a quiet testament to one more day endured. And in the dark, you smile, not because your feet are warm, they're not, but because they're wrapped in something uniquely, unmistakably yours. Inside the tent, the debate rages like an Oxford salon. if everyone were frostbitten and slightly delirious? Fur or fabric? You're seated near the stove, a glorified oil lamp, really surrounded by half-dressed men, airing out their socks like sacred scrolls. The question on everyone's cracked lips is this: are sealskin socks superior to wool? Or is this just another myth peddled by smug veterans? You've tried both. Wool has the charm of familiarity. British, damp, traditional, but fur. That's another story. The first time you slide your foot into a sealskin liner, you understand the hype. It's like stepping into a warm cave lined with whispers, soft, dry, and improbably insulating. Inuit guides wear them almost exclusively, with the hair facing inward to trap heat. You immediately want 10 more pairs. Still, you hesitate. There's something alive about wearing fur socks. They retain the smell of the hunt, the shape of the animal, the memory of snow. You wonder if the sealskin remembers what the sea felt like before it became your personal insulation. You shake the thought off. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Hayworth declares fur a slippery betrayal. His sealskin pair made his boots slide too much on icy terrain. He nearly toppled into a snowbank full of what may or may not have been wolf droppings. Never again, he says, dramatically redonning his thickest wool pair with the reverence of a priest preparing communion. The other side of the room disagrees. Enthusiastically. Wool soaks, Private Reese argues. You want wet feet, you go with sheep. Someone throws a balled-up liner at him. It's all good-natured, mostly. You sip from a tin mug of lukewarm broth and watch the debate unfold like a late-night radio show in sock form. Historians still argue which material performed better in the field. Wool, widely available and easier to replace, became standard issue. But those who lived long enough to write memoirs often praised fur for its warmth and longevity, especially when acquired through trade, not shipment. That's where the Inuit come in. Their sock equivalents, inner linings made of animal hide, sometimes even bird skin, are crafted for survival, not comfort. And yet, they are comfortable. Featherlight, stitched with sinew, designed with generations of cold in mind. You once traded 2 wool socks and a tin of jam for a pair of Inuit-made boot liners. It was the best trade you've ever made. No itching, no dampness, just warmth. You remember the elder who gave them to you, laughing gently when you inspected the stitching. You British always want more layers, he said, shaking his head. One good one is better than 5 bad ones. You didn't argue. You just nodded and slipped them on. Back in the tent, the stove pings as it cools, sending tiny echoes through the air. The debate slows. No one's changed their mind, but everyone's changed their socks. You note who's gone fur, who's stayed wool, and who, like you, has decided on a hybrid model: fur inner, wool outer. A diplomatic solution. Cold toes make for strange politics. You retire for the night and slip your feet into the soft cradle of your sealskin pair, hidden all day in your coat. They smell faintly of smoke and pine sazap. You sigh with contentment. It's like curling into bed with a warm, silent dog. And as you drift off, you think maybe it doesn't matter what material your socks are made of. Maybe it's the ritual, the careful wrapping, the silent gratitude, the tiny pocket of warmth that truly protects you out here. Still, tomorrow, you're definitely wearing the fur again. You've just sat down for your midday ration, lukewarm biscuits, and something that might be pemmican, though no one's entirely sure anymore when the dreaded phrase echoes through the camp: foot inspection. You groan, not because it's unnecessary, but because you already know what's coming. Dampness, discoloration, and if your luck's bad, the faint tingle of something worse: rot. It starts as a prickling, usually between the toes, then a soreness. Then, if ignored long enough, your skin begins to soften and separate. Trench foot, they called it in later wars. Out here in the Arctic, it had no formal name, just the whispered terror of sponge foot, or the soft curse. You sit on your crate and begin the ritual. Boots off, outer socks damp, middle socks very damp, inner liners wringing wet. The smell hits you like a sack of old cabbage. You look around. Everyone else is doing the same. Each man hunched over his feet like a mortician performing an autopsy. The sock marshal walks slowly between you, carrying a lantern and a notebook. You hear the occasional mutter, "Too long worn," or "should have changed after March," or the dreaded "get the medic." Historians still argue whether foot rot was the most common cause of expedition dropout. Some say scurvy or malnutrition did more damage, but anyone who's worn soaked socks for 16 hours at 20 below knows the real enemy is microbial. There are treatments. None are pleasant. A vinegar soak, if you're lucky enough to still have vinegar. A rub down with snow, ironically. Air drying over open flame. One man claims soaking in whale oil helps. Another swears by salt. Everyone agrees dry is king. So you begin your war against moisture with whatever tools you have. You wring out your liners, watching the dark water drip onto the snow. Then you lay the socks on your thighs and press gently, hoping body heat can finish the job. It doesn't. You recall the story of a man on Shackleton's crew who supposedly wore a pair of socks continuously for 3 weeks, never removing them, simply letting them dry on his feet. His toes turned orange. The sock had to be cut off. It had fused to him like a second skin. That story lives in your head now, rent-free. You glance at your tent mate who's holding his sock in the light like it's a fine wine. Bit mildewed, he mutters. Aged poorly. You both laugh. It helps, slightly. Later, someone suggests crafting foot powder from crushed charcoal and flour. It works. Not at all. But the act of trying gives everyone something to do and something to hope for. Tonight, your socks hang like ghosts above the stove. The tent smells of wool and old stew. You reach down and rub your feet with a bit of tallow from your ration tin. The skin cracks as you work it in. A sign of healing or damage. You don't know. You just keep rubbing. One of the older crewmen, a weathered Scot named Brenner, begins humming a song. Something soft. Gaelic, maybe. You close your eyes and let the warmth of the fire and the rhythm of the tune blend into something close to peace. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Because out here, the war isn't against the ice or the snow. It's against the slow betrayal of your own feet. And the socks, they are the front line. A cold gust slices through the flap of the tent, carrying with it the scent of snow, seal oil, and something more pleasant leather and fur, stitched and sewn with quiet skill. The Inuit have returned. They arrive like ghosts, silently skimming across the ice in their sleds, parkas, ruffling in the breeze, their dogs as quiet as the wind. And as always, the British camp watches them with a mix of awe and envy. Because despite your layers of wool, your elaborate rituals, your charts and timetables, they are never cold. And their socks, if you can even call them that, are part of the mystery. You're invited into a small tent, one stitched from hide and warmed by seal fat lamps. There, sitting cross-legged on the ground, a woman pulls out a pair of boots, mukluks. But more than that, systems, each one crafted with care, a sealskin outer boot lined with grass or down, and inside that thin socks made of carefully tanned caribou hide. You reach out and touch the inner lining. It's soft, softer than anything you've worn all winter. It feels thoughtful, like someone designed it not for the idea of cold, but for the reality of it. They don't layer 5 socks. They wear one done right. You exchange a pair of coarse British wool socks for a set of theirs. A young man laughs softly as he folds your offering. "These make good mittens," he jokes. You grin, pretending not to be slightly offended. Back in your own tent, you try them on. It's like stepping into a warm pocket of dry forest air. No itching, no stiffness, no rot. You move your toes, and for the first time in weeks, they don't feel like half-baked potatoes. Historians still argue how much British explorers borrowed or failed to borrow from indigenous Arctic communities. There are records of trade, notes in journals, but few formal acknowledgments. Pride, perhaps, or ignorance. Either way, many of the old expedition logs include carefully drawn diagrams of Inuit footwear, annotated like treasure maps. You become something of a convert. You dry your new pair the way they showed you never, over open flame, always air-dried, with the hair facing out. You stuff them with dried moss at night to wick away moisture. You even start using the same soapberry salve on your feet they gave you in a tiny hand-carved tin. And when the British socks give out, as they always do, you find yourself returning to the fur-lined wonders, treating them less like clothing and more like lifelines. Soon others notice. Private Merton, eternal skeptic, asks if he can just try them on for science. Lieutenant Braithwaite awkwardly inquires whether the Inuit might be commissioned to produce a few more. Before long, a quiet shift occurs. Fewer men are wearing standard issue. More are lining their boots with hide and grass. The sock marshal grumbles, but even he's traded his wool liners for something more natural. You begin to wonder how much suffering could have been avoided had the Navy simply asked. But that's not your battle. You're just glad your feet don't ache anymore. At night, you slip off the boots, remove the sock, and set it gently beside your sleeping roll. It's no longer just a sock. It's a teacher, a friend, a survival manual written in thread. You fall asleep that night, not dreaming of home, but of the trail, windless, moonlit, your boots silent in snow, your socks warm as a memory. A storm rolls in just after dusk, the wind battering the tents like a drummer with something to prove. Snow seeps in through every seam, powdering your gear with a fine white dust. It's the kind of cold that creeps slowly, patiently, as if it knows it will win, eventually. And that's when it happens. You wake with a jolt in the middle of the night, your right foot burning, not from heat, but from cold so deep it feels hot. You throw off your furs and scramble to check. The sock you wore to sleep is damp, not wet, just moist enough to betray you. your toes pale and slightly swollen, don't respond to your touch right away. You curse under your breath. This is the line, the fragile, frost-bitten line between fine and forever damaged. You fumble for your emergency pair. The dry pair, the one hidden in the inner lining of your coat, for weeks never worn, never even exposed to breath. You pull it out like a sacred relic. You slip it on, slowly, wincing as the fibers brush your skin. It's wool scratchy, yes, but it hugs your foot with a gentleness you swear it didn't have before. You add a second layer, then two more, careful to keep everything dry. You wrap your feet in linen, then push them back under your blanket and hold your breath. The warmth returns slowly, reluctantly, like a pet you've frightened. You whisper to your toes as if they can hear you. Don't leave me yet. Around you, the camp stirs. Someone else groans. A few curse. A lantern flickers to life in the corner. The sock marshal makes a groggy round muttering. Check your feet, lads. No heroes tonight. Historians still argue whether one particular expedition survived because of a single pair of socks. The tale, almost certainly embellished, tells of a man who gave his last dry pair to his commander on a night just like this, saving him from frostbite that would have ended the journey. The socks were later preserved in a museum, complete with a plaque that read, "Warmth shared is survival multiplied." You don't know if that's true, but in this moment, it feels possible. By morning, the storm has buried the sleds under a foot of snow. The tent creaks with ice, and the cooking fire refuses to light. But your toes are still there. They're stiff, a little sore, but they're pink. Alive. You wiggle them and feel a flood of gratitude for a sock whose seam you used to complain about. That day, the men move more slowly. Everyone's a bit quieter, a bit more cautious. No one talks about the cold. They talk about food, the sky, how the ice makes strange noises at night. But not the cold. That's private now. Later, when you have a quiet moment, you take out the sock that saved your foot and fold it carefully. You stitch a tiny symbol into the cuff, a crude circle with a dot inside. It means nothing, or maybe everything. You just want to remember, to mark the fact that in the long war between flesh and frost, this sock won a small, quiet battle. That night, you dream of spring, not warm winds or blooming trees, just dry grass under your feet, and the gentle scratch of wool that doesn't itch anymore. You smile in your sleep, because sometimes survival is just a matter of having the right sock at the right time. You're flipping through an old expedition journal, well copying from it, since you've spilled whale oil tea on your own notebook again when you stumble across a page titled simply Sock Log. At first you think it's a joke, a ledger just for socks. But as your eyes adjust to the candlelight, you see it's real. Meticulously written entries, one per day, tracking the state of a man's footgear with the gravity of a ship's logbook. March 3rd. Left sock dry, right damp, at heel. Mild rubbing. Rotating in sleeping bag. March 4th. Right sock stiffer, will attempt boot fire steam drying. March 5th. Sock lost in sled incident, replaced with linen wrap plus fur cuff. You look up dumbfounded. The detail, the dedication. It's absurd, and also deeply, painfully familiar, because you've been doing the same. Not on paper, maybe, but in your head. Each morning begins with a mental checklist. Which pair survived the night? Which liner has the tiny tear near the toe? Which wool layer itches less? You've even started naming days after socks. Oh, it's red cuff. Thursday. Frostbite. Friday's coming. Better double wrap. And it's not just you. Corporal Fisk has started sketching his socks in his journal. Sketching them, carefully shading in the wear patterns, like a naturalist studying bird feathers. Lieutenant Morley writes daily odes to his unwavering left liner. He claims poetry helps him stay sane. You don't argue. The sock marshal, meanwhile, has evolved into something of a librarian. He's begun cataloging pairs with tags: good, repairable, ruinous, experimental. He even tried building a sock drying schedule for the tent, complete with time slots and warmest spots near the stove. It devolved into chaos after someone's pair caught fire. But the idea was noble. Historians still argue about the usefulness of these routines. Some dismiss them as coping mechanisms, delusions of control in an uncontrollable landscape. Others, though, see genius daily rituals that gave structure to frozen, formless days. You're inclined to agree with the latter, because something happens when you treat your socks like sacred objects. You care more. You maintain better habits. You begin seeing every torn stitch not as failure, but as proof you made it through another day. You start keeping a record yourself. Your entries are simple. April 9th, ice-crusted pear revived near stove. Renamed Stiff and Ready. April 10th, traded mismatched set for dried fish. May have overpaid. No regrets. April 11th, created inner liner from discarded scarf. Foot feels philosophical. The others find your notes and start adding their own. Soon the journal becomes a communal sock diary full of doodles, diagrams, sarcastic footnotes. It's ridiculous. It's beautiful. It matters. At night, you pass it around. A man reads his line aloud, and the tent fills with tired chuckles. For a moment, the cold is less cruel, the dark less deep. You close your eyes, sock-wrapped feet curled under layers of patched wool, and feel an odd pride, not in surviving, but in documenting it, in proving that even at the edge of the world there is order, there is humor, there is meaning, even in something as mundane as a sock. Tomorrow, you'll write a new entry. You're already thinking of the title. April 12th. Left sock, missing, possibly stolen by fox. Right sock, skeptical. By now, your socks are more than survival gear. They're narrative devices, punchlines, and occasionally, scapegoats. Like today, you're halfway through sled hauling duty when your right boot begins to wobble in a peculiar way. You stop, investigate, and find that your sock has bunched up into a woolen knot under your heel. Not only uncomfortable, but dangerous. You nearly tripped on a patch of hidden ice, and that, as you know, is how ankles get ruined and reputations unravel. The camp medic, who has little time or patience for sock-related injuries, calls it compression bunching, delivered with such clinical detachment that you feel both insulted and oddly impressed. You head back to camp, limping slightly, your sock traitorously coiled inside your boot like a prank snake. You vow to be more careful. But as you'll later learn, even the best-maintained sock has a mind of its own. That evening, you meet the sock inspector, not the sock marshal. That role was always administrative. No, the inspector is different. A man on Shackleton's crew apparently held this role officially, his sole duty being to examine the condition of everyone's footgear twice daily. He was nicknamed the Baron of the Ball Socks. You don't know if your own expedition's inspector is self-appointed or somehow sanctioned by the command tent. But there he is, Private Alton. Formerly quiet, now holding court with a clipboard, a candle, and a deeply unsettling amount of enthusiasm. Sock rotation. Log, please, he says, with an almost cheery bark. You blink. What? He points to your feet. I've noted you wore the blue and brown pair yesterday. Still in use. You want to argue, but you can't remember. Was that yesterday or the day before? The weeks blur together like snow on canvas. So you shrug. Probably. He clicks his tongue and marks something ominous on his sheet. You learn that Alton has developed a system, not just checking for dampness, but sock fatigue, thread density, heel compression. He awards points. He deducts stars. It's part game, part health protocol, and annoyingly, it's effective. Since his reign began, frostbite cases have dropped. Morale has risen, and you haven't heard the phrase toes turning black in at least 5 days. Historians still argue whether such roles were official or just desperate grabs for control. You'd argue they were both. Because in the chaos of the Arctic, sometimes a clipboard is as powerful as a compass. You grudgingly begin to enjoy the inspections. They become routine, one of the only structured parts of your day. Alton nods when you rotate properly, frowns when you forget. He once held up a sock to the light and muttered, "This isn't even a sock anymore. It's a suggestion." You laughed. So did everyone else. It was the biggest laugh the camp had had in days. Eventually, the sock inspector begins leaving notes. Tiny tags attached to particularly remarkable socks. Heroic dampness, but admirable stitching. This one's been through emotional trauma. Officially retired with honors. Men start wanting the tags. It becomes a strange badge of resilience. You find one clipped to your own pair one morning. It reads, "Looks like death. Feels like home." You tear up a little. You don't know why. That night, you offer your favorite sock, Lefty the Brave, for ceremonial display. It's pinned on the center pole of the tent, crisp with frost, its heel fully patched, its toe embroidered with your initials. The others add theirs. Soon there's a line of retired legends fluttering like woolen prayer flags, and for the first time in a long while, you feel something you hadn't dared to entertain since leaving Port Pride. Not in conquest, not in distance traveled, but in persistence, in care, in the simple act of putting on a sock day after day in the face of cold that could undo you. You fall asleep that night with bare feet tucked deep in the sleeping bag, not because you're careless, but because for once your feet feel safe enough to rest. The sun returns today, not in full, not warm, but there. A strange glow on the horizon, thin as thread, golden like honey, watered down. You stare at it with reverence, socks clutched in your hands, like binoculars. It feels like a blessing, a turning point. The whole camp is different. The air smells less like stale breath and more like possibility. People are smiling, or at least their grimaces are curling upward at the edges. The sock inspector, who has recently taken to calling himself Commodore Alton, announces a spring sock review. You think he's joking. He is not. Each man is to present his finest pair, tell a short history, and receive feedback. There will be prizes, an extra biscuit, a tin of jam, and for the grand champion, a pristine, never-worn pair of Royal Navy-issued wool socks preserved in wax paper, like a holy relic. You enter the contest. You're offering a pair stitched from 2 mismatched socks, repaired with a strip of tent canvas and sealed with melted wax. You call them the diplomats. You present their saga like an explorer, recounting a voyage, the blizzard they survived, the boot they escaped, the toe they nearly lost. Others follow. The sock that was once a scarf, the phantom liner, Granny's regret. It's absurd. It's glorious. It's healing. Commodore Alton offers commentary like a judge on a cooking show. Impressive wool integrity, bold use of sinew. I admire your disregard for symmetry. Historians still argue whether such rituals helped boost morale or merely distracted from dwindling supplies. But what's the difference? Really? Distraction is morale, especially when you've been sleeping on frozen soil for 8 weeks with only a lump of boiled fat to keep you company. That night, you win second place. First goes to Private Merton for a pair of hand-wrapped fox fur foot tubes stitched with copper wire. A technical masterpiece. Deserved, you admit. Begrudgingly. You receive your prize, a tin of jam, and immediately trade it for a foot massage from the cook who's developed surprisingly gentle hands and an entrepreneurial streak. Best deal you've made in weeks. Later, as you crawl into your sleeping bag, you notice something. The socks you're wearing. Old patched, nearly translucent feel. Soft. Softer than you remember. Maybe they've been softened by time. Maybe by wear. Or maybe you've just grown used to their failings and made peace with them. You close your eyes and think these socks and I have been through something together. We've shared blizzards, fires, near misses, and quiet victories. And though they're just fabric and thread, they've earned your respect. You make a mental note when you return home. If you return home, you'll keep them. Frame them, maybe. Not out of nostalgia, but reverence. Because these weren't just socks. They were your armor. Your tent mates breathe softly around you. The stove crackles. The canvas walls flutter in rhythm with your heartbeat. You drift off slowly, your feet wrapped in history, your dreams woven from wool and wind. You rise early on what feels like the last true morning of the long frost. The air, while still sharp, has lost its vicious edge. Even the snow seems to creak less when you walk across it. Something in the rhythm of the camp tells you the worst is behind you. You slip into your final pair of socks, the ones you've been saving for weeks. The parade pair. Bright navy blue, barely worn, once ceremonially distributed on the first day of the expedition. Everyone received one pair like it. Most tore theirs within a month. Yours survived, somehow sealed in a tin box, wrapped in waxed linen, labeled "in case of hope." Today feels like the right day to wear them. They slide on smooth and snug, their fibers warm from being tucked under your shirt overnight. You walk taller. You feel ridiculous, as it sounds respected by your own socks. Outside, others are doing the same. Mismatched pairs have been retired. Socks mended and re-darned are given one more round of quiet praise. Even the sock marshal, now free from his official duties, dons a ceremonial pair with striped cuffs and salutes the drying line one last time. There's a sense of closure. The sleds are packed, the charts rolled, the weather mercifully holding steady. The horizon glows faintly rose. It's time to return. Before you go, you do one final inspection of the tent. Folded liners, cleaned boots, a carefully stored box of backup foot wrappings, your own sock journal, now over 20 pages long, tucked safely in your kit. You smile at the absurdity and the necessity of it all. You kneel, place your retired pair, the ones that got you through the blizzard, the ones you stitched 5 times, under a small pile of stones near the tent post. A kind of burial, a tribute. Historians won't remember them. No museum will hang them in a glass box. But you will, and maybe, just maybe, someone years from now will find them, pull them free from the ice, and wonder at the softness of the fabric, the care in every stitch, the strange comfort held in their faded thread. You join the others at the sleds. The dogs are restless. The sky is wide. As the first sled begins to move, you turn back one last time. Not at the camp, not at the map, but at the trail of footprints leading from where you began to where you stand now. Each one made by the humble, loyal companions wrapped around your feet. Each one warmed by a sock. So now, as you lie there in your own quiet room, blanket pulled to your chin, fan humming low, let yourself breathe a little slower. Imagine the cold fading away. Not suddenly, but gently, as if the air itself is exhaling beside you. You're no longer trudging through snowdrifts or rotating damp liners. You're still now. Warm. Comfortable, your feet wrapped in the softest socks you own, even if only in your imagination. Think of those men laughing around the fire over mismatched pairs, stitching thread by starlight, naming their socks like old friends. Think of the quiet moments they shared, wrapped in wool and wind and stories told in whispers. And maybe you smile just a little at the absurdity of it all. that something so small, so seemingly ordinary, could carry so much meaning, could matter. Your breathing deepens. The details of the Arctic fade into mist. The sleds, the tents, the cold, until all that remains is the warmth at your feet and the knowledge that even in the harshest places on Earth, comfort can be found in the simplest things. You've made it through the frost, and now it's time to rest. Good night, traveler. Sleep well.